Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today is all about reflecting and goal setting. So today what I really want to do is tell you my 24 priority reads for 2024, but also I actually made a 23 books I want to read in 2023 list. This is well before I even started making YouTube videos or TikToks or anything. I just made it because that's the type of person I am. I've just always prioritized reading so much that I always organized my own reading. So I made this list back in January of 2023 of the 23 books that I wanted to read. So I want to go through that list and see how well I did, and also tell you the 24 books that I want to read in 2024. And we're going to maybe learn from the list of what I did and didn't get to, and talk about how I want to prioritize my reading in the year to come. What's quite nice about 2024, having 24 reads for 2024, is that works out at about 2 books a month. So seems very reasonable, and it seems like a goal that I could definitely achieve. But it does still mean that I have to think carefully about what books I'm putting on that list, because they can't all be difficult and things I'm dreading reading, but some of them also have to be, because sometimes when I push myself to read things, they turn up to be the best books that I've ever read, and they're challenging for a good reason. So it's going to be a balance of both. But let's start off this video by going through the 23 books that I said I was going to read in 2023. So I actually have it on my Notion. A couple of people have asked me for kind of a Notion tour. I don't really want to do that because my Notion is so ugly and like unaesthetic, and compared to some other people's, it's just so beautiful. Like, I don't know how they do it. So mine is just literally a list. Hello. Miso's just come in the room, so maybe she'll come and say hello in a minute. Honestly, at first glance, I did such a good job. I'm not gonna lie. I did a real good job. And I think a lot of this is because I did have some fun books on this list. I wasn't really pushing myself too hard. So let's start at the top. The first book that I wanted to read in 2023 is The Atlas Paradox, which is actually just here. This is one of the books I wanted to read in 2023 because I wanted to carry on with this series to hopefully finish it off this year. I am doing that goal very well because I'm now currently reading The Atlas Complex, which is the third book in this series. So I did achieve that goal, and I am pretty pleased with it because I, like many people, I think, am really bad at finishing off series. I love starting a new series, love getting midway through, but I never finish them off. So I'm also planning actually a video on which series I'm currently reading, which ones I'm not going to finish, which ones I am going to finish. So let me know if you are interested in seeing that. But next up, these few books were just things that I've had floating around for ages, and I just never got down to them. When I was making my monthly TBRs, I was never picking these books up. So these are a few of those. Madness of a Seduced Woman. This one had been recommended to me by a friend, but ended up being on my worst books of the year video. So if you have not seen that video, I will tag it up here for you to go and see what else made that list. I really should have DNF'd it. I only started DNFing books halfway through last year, and I've still only DNF'd 5 books in my entire life, which is ridiculous because that's something that I am making a goal for 2024. Next up was Cloud Cuckoo Land. I did end up reading this. This one I liked a lot more after I'd immediately finished it, and then now I've sat with it for a while. I think it's gone down in my estimations. Next up was Severance. I ended up getting the US edition because I just love this kind of beat up notebook version. I don't love the UK version as much. I ended up reading this. I loved it, and then I also went on to read Bliss Montage by the same author, and I also loved that, so I'm glad this was on the list. Next up was continuing on with the series again, and it was The Republic of Thieves. This is book number 3 in The Lies of Locke Lamora. That's the first book, and I read The Lies of Locke Lamora many years ago, and I read the second book kind of immediately following on from that, and then just hadn't carried on with the series. The fourth and final, I think, book is Nowhere in Sight, so I shouldn't really have rushed to read this one, but I kind of wanted to see where I landed with carrying on or putting down this series, and because I really loved the first one, I didn't love the second one as much, and then I liked this one, so I'm still kind of in the middle of where I'm going to carry on with this series or not. Next up, we have The Underground Railroad. I just had this on my list for so many years and I really wanted to get to it. I ended up reading it and I didn't really like it. This author's writing didn't really fit for me, and I didn't find it that engaging as a book, so I'm glad I read it, but not a favourite. Next up was Don Quixote. Oh, I think I say this wrong, by the way. I get told off for saying Don Quixote wrong, but I don't know how to say it properly with an English accent. I don't want to sound like I'm trying to sound Spanish when I'm saying it. Anyway, so Don Quixote, I did end up reading it. This is the longest it's ever taken me to finish a book. It's really long, but also it's very boring in aspects of it. It's a classic adventure story. It is like nothing else I've ever read. It's a book within a book. It is so strange, and it was such a journey to go on, and I honestly feel slightly gaslit by this book. I enjoyed it by the end of it, but like, was my enjoyment just kind of relief at having finished it because it took me about 9 months to read? Maybe. How much could I have really been enjoying it if it took me 9 months, you know? Normally I read a book in like 5 days. Anyway, some mixed feelings about Don Quixote. Perhaps I'm being held hostage in my mind by how long that book was. So next up we have The Grapes of Wrath. And this is another one that was just on my list for ages. And I'd read a bit of Steinbeck before and didn't really like his books, but I wanted to read his main ones, and I thought that was going to be The Grapes of Wrath. I ended up liking this book, but I am so grateful that I put this on my list because ultimately this book is what led me to then read East of Eden, which is now one of my favourite books, and it was on my best books of the year, which if you have not seen that video yet, I will tag it up here somewhere as well. Next up, one of the last books that I managed to finish, I'd read this in December, so I was cutting it really close, and I read Slaughterhouse 5, and I ended up loving this book as well, and this had been on my list the longest, so my TBR on Goodreads, this had been on there for maybe 6 or 7 years, and I had never read it, and I finally read it. I really loved it in the end. And then next up, something I slightly failed on, so my goal was to reread and finish the first Robin Hobb trilogy, which is the Farseer trilogy. So this trilogy is made up of The Assassin's Apprentice, and then there is The Royal Assassin, and then there is Assassin's Quest that I have this very cool edition of. Basically, I wanted to reread the first two so that I could finish the third one. Let's see if I can do that. I ended up actually rereading the first one, and then I didn't want to reread the second one because it's very long, and I just wanted to jump into the third one. So did kind of almost finish this. I got halfway through the third book. I cannot technically tick it off because I did not finish Assassin's Quest, but we're making progress. Next up, another series that I just have heard so much about and really wanted to read, which was The Bear and the Nightingale. I loved this. I saved this for winter time, and it was a perfect decision. It was a really, really good opening of a trilogy. Next up was The Bands of Mourning. This is from Mistborn Era 2, which I was just really slacking on reading for some reason. I didn't really love the first book in the Era 2 of Mistborn. I did really like the second one, and I think this is the third one? Is it? Let me double check that. This is the third one, and then now I think there is a fourth one as well. I absolutely love this. I don't know why I was putting it off for so long. It was a 5-star read for me. I love it, Mistborn Era 1, and I didn't like the beginning of Era 2, but now at this point I'm absolutely loving it. It's like feeling like classic Sanderson, so really glad that I read that. And then the next book that I wanted to read is actually just sitting here. It's The Fall of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. It's the fourth and final book in the Senlin Ascends, or like Tower of Babel series. And I really just needed to finish off that series because I wanted to know if it's going to be one of my favourite series of all time, because the first few books definitely were. Unfortunately, the fourth and final book was just not amazing enough for me to say that it was a favourite series of all time. I was slightly disappointed, but I still very much enjoyed the ride, and it was definitely worth reading. Next up we have The Jasmine Throne, which I did read. I also read this quite late in the year, but I absolutely loved it, and I'm like, I like when I get to ones in this list that I'm like, why did I put this off for so long? I absolutely loved this book, and I cannot wait to do book 2 this year. Next up was a sci-fi, which is Project Hail Mary. I'm not sure why this is actually on this list. Maybe I just put some fun ones on there to like spice it up. I did read this. I also loved it. I think I love The Martian more, but I do love both of these books, and they are great sci-fis. Also excellent as an audiobook. If you are interested in audiobooks, I did do a video all about my favourite audiobooks, so I will tag that here as well if you're interested. And then next up, we're coming up to the Wheel of Time. So this is the year that I was finally trying to get back into the Wheel of Time. I'd taken about a 2-year break after I got up to book number 8. So I wanted to read at least 3 this year, and I read 1. So I did not achieve my goal. I did get back into it though. I read number 9, and it wasn't as bad as I'd been dreading, because if you don't know, there's this big slog in the middle of the Wheel of Time, and the books just really kind of really slow down, and I'd just been absolutely dreading picking the back up again and just having to force my way through to get to the ending that I've heard is really amazing. And it wasn't as bad as I thought, but I've now started reading number 10, The Crossroads of Twilight, and I've been reading it for a few weeks, and I'm like 5% in. So it's not going very well, but we will get into that when I do my 24 books for 2024 list. Next up is The Bone Shard Daughter, which I did read and I didn't like. So I'm glad that I had it on this list to kind of clear it out of I've actually given it away now. So I'm glad that it was on there just to be able to do that, because it did not work for me at all. I didn't really like that book. Next is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, and I really liked this book, but what I liked even more is that I went and read other Naomi Novik books after I finished Spinning Silver, because I really liked Uprooted. I've read that years ago. I hadn't read Spinning Silver or anything else by her, and then after I read Spinning Silver, I started the Scholomance series, and I've been absolutely loving that series, so I'm glad this was on the list to lead me to that as well. And then the last three are just carrying on with series that I'd been neglecting. So it was the Percy Jackson #4, which I thought was the fourth and final of the Percy Jackson series. It turns out it's not. I read it, it was fine. I don't have strong opinions on Percy Jackson. Next up was Harrow the Ninth. This is one of the best books that I read last year. I absolutely love Harrow the Ninth. So good. I cannot wait to carry on with that series now. And then finally a DNF, which is one of the only ones I managed to DNF. I tried to read this in December. I think it's been too long since I read Fortuna Sworn, the first book, so this was Restless Slumber. I DNF'd it because I just did not care anymore. Also, the second book started basically immediately after the first book ended, and I don't know, like the way it was structured, the beginning of the book, I just realised it's just not for me, and I'm just not really, I don't know, I wasn't excited about it. I didn't really want to read it. So that is all the 23 books I managed to read in 2023, or the books I tried to read in 2023, and I think I did pretty well, and it's kind of very encouraged me to do it again for this year. So things I've learned, I think it's a really good way to carry on reading series. I'm going to add on a few books that I want to read next in series. Also, it's a really good way to read classics that I've been meaning to read for a while, and they often end up being absolute favourite books. Something I'm going to do differently on this list is add in a lot more non-fiction, because that's something I've been really neglecting, especially in the second half of this year. So I'm going to add in a few non-fiction reads that I've just had on my TBR for ages and I really want to read them, so I'm going to add those in as well. And also there's some other random books that have just been on my TBR for way too long, so let me talk you through the list. Say hi, Misa. You want to say hi, Misa? She does not want to say hi. Anyway, I just spent so long reorganising that list because as I was making this video I wanted to change the list, but I'm pretty happy with where we've ended up. I have 24 books that I want to read in 2024, and let me talk you through it. So the first kind of section is going to be non-fiction, and these are books that either been on my list for ages, ones that I just really want to prioritise that I've heard are amazing, or that I've been heavily recommended by people. So I'll just blast through these first few. I don't know much about them other than their title. First one is Capitalism Alone, with the tagline as "The future of the system that rules the world." I want to read this because I want to know, when I say capitalism is evil and people say, well, what else is there? I want to know what else there is. Do you know what I mean? The next one is in a similar vein, Debt, the First 5,000 Years. I find non-fiction books around this kind of topic really interesting. I've had this on my TBR for so long, so I just want to prioritise them this year. Next up is one that I've been recommended by a friend, and it's very maths heavy, but the way he talked about this book, I just really want to read it. And it is Gödel, Escher and Bach, and Eternal Golden Braid. I think this is really like theoretical and maths heavy, but I'm gonna give it a go. Even if I don't finish it, that's fine. And then next up is a couple of memoirs. The first is The Glass Castle. I've heard that this is an incredible memoir. I really loved Educated, and people who said that they also loved Educated also loved The Glass Castle. So the next one is also a memoir, but it's also a memoir? I don't know. I'll see when I read it, but is The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson, and this has been heavily recommended to me by Alice, so I really want to read this one. It seems also just like the description of it is very strange. It's a memoir, but it's not a memoir, and I just think that it'll be such an interesting read. Next up, me and Alice are actually both going to read The Diary of Anne Frank together in 2024 because I've never read it, she's never read it, and it kind of feels like a big gap in our reading, like that we haven't read it at this point, so gonna get to that in 2024. And then next up is Tuesdays with Maury, which is also, I think, a non-fiction memoir type book, something that I've just heard about for so many years and never picked it up, so it's going on the list. So they, I think, are all of the non-fiction memoir books that I want to read. There are 7 of them. I'm pretty happy with that. And then the next section is going to be classics that I really want to get to, or that I'm like challenging myself to read this year. So firstly, we have David Copperfield, which I said that I was done with Dickens, but then I read Demon Copperhead and I absolutely loved it, and I just feel like I should definitely read the original source material, which is David Copperfield. Also, my mum loves Dickens, and also Alice also likes Dickens, and I feel like I can't continually be wrong, so I'm going to give Dickens one last chance, and I'm going to do David Copperfield in 2024. Next up, a couple of Russian books. We have War and Peace that I've never read, and also Crime and Punishment. So both of these just heard so much about them. Really want to see what they're about for myself. I've actually already started Crime and Punishment, so I'm pretty pleased with myself. I started it on audiobook and I'm already 15% through, and I'm really liking it so far. It's a lot more engaging than I thought it was going to be. In my previous experience with reading very long Russian classics, I always enjoy them more than I think I'm going to if I just give them a chance, so I'm hoping that's going to be the case with these two again. Also, side note, just look at my gorgeous copy of War and Peace. Oh my god, it's so long, but I really do want to read this. I love this edition. I'm just terrified of that. Look at it. It's almost a square. So next up, another classic that I want to read, or I think this is considered a classic. I actually don't know much about this book, but it is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. Is that how you say his name? I have no idea what this is about, and I don't want to know, because I honestly think with books like this that I'm scared about, or like that I have had on my TBR, or that I know about for so long and that I haven't read yet, the less I know going in, the better. Because I like to be surprised by every little aspect, like when it's set, where it is, who are the characters, you know what I mean? Like, it makes me more excited to pick up the book. Next up, a few more fantasy series that I'm going to start, or just random fantasy books that I want to read. Starting with, I'm going to finally start my Joe Abercrombie reading experience. I've never read a Joe Abercrombie before, and I'm starting with The Blade Itself, which I've heard is a good place to start. I'm very excited. I'm very nervous. These are quite like brutal and dark fantasy books, but I do kind of like that, so we'll see how it goes. Next up, I also want to read Red Sister. This is just a series I've wanted to start for so long, and I never have, and I'm desperate to start it, and I don't know why I haven't, so I'm going to try and prioritize it by putting it on this list. And then next up, I want to continue with my read of Ursula K. Le Guin, and I want to read The Dispossessed. I have loved everything I've read from Ursula K. Le Guin so far, so I want to carry on trying to read as many of her books as I possibly can. Next up, just a few random books that I want to read that have been like really highly recommended, or that I just feel like I need to read. And the first one of that is 84 Charing Cross Road. Alice has recommended this to me. So many other people have recommended it to me. I've seen it on lots of people's favourite books lists of all time. So I just feel like I'm already going to love it, and I just really need to read it. But then one that I am much less excited for is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I read Love in Time of Cholera by the same author, and I hated it, and I made a whole video on TikTok about how I really didn't like it, and then I got called a snob and that I don't understand Latin American literature, and that this is the book that I actually really needed to read. So I'm kind of reading this out of spite, slightly. I'm also am curious because lots of people I do trust say that they preferred this book a lot more, so I am going to read it. I'm going to try and go in with an open mind. We shall see how that goes. I'm slightly terrified of it, which is why it has to go on this list. Next up, a book that I've had kicking about on my shelves for a while, and this is going to be read for my Reading Around the World challenge. And I'm actually hopefully going to read it this month to kind of get a head start on this list already. And it is The Bridge Over the Drina. So if you want to see my January TBR, I'll explain this book and everything else that I'm going to be reading this month as well, so you can go over to that video. Next up, another hugely long book that is very intimidating, but I'm convinced that I will really, really enjoy, and it is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, or Mr. Norrell, I'm not sure how you say that. I read Prioritse by Susanna Clarke and absolutely loved it. It's one of my favourite books of all time, and I just really need to read this book, which is the book that she's probably even more famous for, and I've heard also amazing things about it by everyone who I really have the same taste as, and people that I just really trust. So we are going to see what I think, and I just need to put it on this list to kind of extra motivate me to read this book. Next up, another random sci-fi that I really want to get to is The Three-Body Problem. I've heard amazing things about this. It's another classic of the sci-fi space, and I just really want to read it. And another one that also should have been in the fantasy section that I was talking about is Foundry Side, that I really want to read this book as well. I've just heard amazing things about this series. It's really highly rated, and I have never prioritized reading it, so it's going on this list. And that is 20 books. So the last 4 books are all in the same series, and you might be able to guess which series that's going to be, because this is the series, this is the year that I defeat this series. I'm convinced of it. I have to do it this year. So I'm going to read book 11, 12, 13, and 14 in the Wheel of Time series this year to finish off this series for good. I am so excited to get to the final books in this series. I cannot wait to finally have it over, but also I cannot wait to actually get to the end because I've heard the ending is incredible. One of the original reasons I also ever picked up this book series, other than it being a classic of the genre, me wanting to read lots more classic fantasy, is because this series was actually finished off by Brandon Sanderson, who I love his writing, I love his stories, so I really want to see what he does with this story because he's the one that finished it off. Because if you didn't know, tragically the author Robert Jordan died before he could finish off the end of the series, so Brandon Sanderson took over using the extensive notes that he'd made about how to finish off the series. He finished off the last 2 books, I think, or maybe 3 books. So I just really want to see what he does with this as well. And that is my whole list of the 24 books that I want to read in 2024. Let me know if you make any kind of priority list like this, and if you do, what is on there? What do you want to tackle this year? I love doing it because it feels like it really keeps me on track with stuff that I know is going to push me slightly, but things that I know that I'm going to end up really enjoying, or at least it's a challenge that I feel like is something that expands my reading taste or redefines my reading taste. So I love doing this, and I love putting it full of challenging books or books that I'm just need to prioritize for various different reasons. So that's why I like doing this list, and let me know if you are doing this list as well. That is it from me today. Thank you so much for watching this video. And if you have watched up to this point, then please remember to subscribe if you haven't already, because it means so much to me. And I am now so close to 1,000 subscribers, and I cannot believe it. That feels mind-blowing to me. I can't believe that 1,000 people have clicked that subscribe button. That just feels crazy, but thank you so much if you already have as well. So that is all from me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!